These cases of lost media were completely abandoned or destroyed upon happening, from traumatizing an entire movie set all the way to a US courtroom. And if you are sensitive to any of these topics, of course, viewer discretion is advised. The Crow 1994 was a movie adaptation of the comic book that follows the story of Eric Draven, a man who was brutally murdered alongside his fiancée and comes back from the dead to seek revenge on the criminals responsible. The film was critically acclaimed for its dark visual style and quickly became a cult classic, cementing itself as a landmark in 90s alternative cinema, as The Crow was much different from any other hero movie during that era. Brandon Lee, who was the son of legendary martial artist and actor Bruce Lee, would be casted for the role of Eric Draven, as Brandon up until this point was already an accomplished martial artist and rising actor, as he would spend months preparing physically, emotionally, and in makeup tests to perfect the iconic look. And on March 31st of 1993, as the production of the movie was nearing its end, during the filming of a scene, Eric Draven will confront a group of criminals. The scene required the use of a .44 Magnum revolver, but specifically a Smith & Wesson Model 629, which was modified to fire blanks safe to use on set, which were used all throughout the movie's production. But this scene would become infamous for all the wrong reasons. Unbeknownst to the crew and staff, a fragment of a real bullet had been accidentally lodged in the barrel from a previous stunt. Michael Mazzei, who was playing the role as Fun Boy, who was an antagonist throughout the film, would fire at Brandon as he pulled the trigger on set. The gun was loaded with dummy rounds, but still had the small fragments inside the barrel, and when Michael fired the prop gun, the blink's explosive force propelled the fragment, striking Brandon in the abdomen as he would fall to the ground, with the staff and crew still under the idea that he was acting. And after the director had repeatedly called for cut and Brandon never got up, it quickly became clear that something horrible had gone wrong. After they noticed that Brandon was in immense pain, he was rushed to the hospital and underwent emergency surgery. But despite the immediate medical attention, the injuries were fatal, as Brandon would die in the hospital just a few hours later, and at just 28, Brandon would tragically lose his life. An investigation would take place immediately after the incident, but ultimately no one would be charged as it was deemed as an accident. And despite this, with the use of body doubles and extremely early CGI, which is nowhere near as advanced as it is today, the movie was finished and would release in 1994, which became both a commercial and critical success, grossing over $50 million domestically. The actual death of Brandon Lee would be caught as cameras were rolling during the incident, but the footage has never been made public due to legal, moral, and ethical reasons. The movie's director, Alex Proyas, did claim that the footage had been destroyed, but there's no verified evidence of that. But what we do know is that cameras were on and did capture it, and more than likely is in archival storage, never to be released. Michael Mazzei would take a long break from the film industry as he was deeply traumatized from the incident, as he would suffer from guilt and depression for the rest of his life, even after investigations had cleared him of any criminal responsibility. Linda Lee Cadwell, Brandon's mother, filed a lawsuit in August of 1993 where she would sue the film's producers, the production companies, and individuals involved in the handling of the prop gun. In a 22-page complaint, Cadwell's lawyers outlined a sequence of events beginning last February, which they showed that the defendants, including various crew members, failed to properly exercise their responsibilities or follow industry standards for the use of firearms on a movie set. The suit alleged that crew members ran out of dummy bullets and improperly manufactured their own from live ammunition, instead of waiting a day to buy them from a licensed firearms dealer, but the case would be settled out of court. Brandon Lee was buried at Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle, Washington, which is the same cemetery in which they buried his father, Bruce Lee. Brandon will forever be immortalized for his death during filming and for his role of Eric Draven. In an interview just prior to his death, Brandon would quote a passage from the book The Sheltering Sky, which he had chosen for his wedding invitations, which would be written on his tombstone.
You're not sure. I gave up. How about I gave up? See, this is your life.
Candace Newmaker was a 10-year-old girl from Colorado who struggled with severe emotional and behavioral challenges, which would all stem from early childhood trauma. She had been adopted at the age of 5 by a woman named Newmaker, and according to reports, her new adoptive mother seemingly couldn't handle the problems that Candance would bring her, as she was sent to therapy several times and eventually was put on medications. But none of these options would have any effect, with Candance even reportedly biting her own therapist. And as time went by, Jean had felt that nothing could truly save Candance. And eventually, the adults in Candace's life started to believe that she exhibited signs of reactive attachment disorder, also known as RAD, a rare but serious condition in which an infant or young child doesn't establish healthy attachments with parents or caregivers. However, whether Candance had RAD or not was pretty unclear, as the disorder is also believed to be extremely overdiagnosed as well. But Jean Newmaker was convinced that this was the issue, and being extremely desperate to quote save Candance, she would eventually turn to alternatives. One of which caught her attention immediately, would be something called holding therapy, but it's more commonly known as rebirthing therapy. Rebirthing therapy was a bizarre and dangerous treatment that originated from the 70s. The idea was that kids with attachment issues could be reborn in sessions to fix their trauma. Therapists would literally wrap children in blankets, press them down with pillows, and tell them to fight their way out, as if they were being born again, making the child struggle on purpose to then find comfort in parents, to bond and reconnect. But it basically boils down to fully grown adults, and sometimes unlicensed frauds, putting the child through even more physical and emotional trauma. Needless to say, it was extremely controversial, even back in the 90s, with many people seeing it for the garbage it was. But Jean Newmaker felt that this was the only way, and on April 4th of 2000, both Jean and Candance would make the trip to Evergreen, Colorado, as she would admit her to a 7,000, 2-week intensive session of attachment therapy with Connell Watkins, an unlicensed therapist who was leading the session, Julie Ponder, who was also another unlicensed quote therapist, who worked with Watkins as an assistant, along with Britta St. Clair, who were also 2 of Watkins' assistants. Tens of hours from the rebirthing sessions from the preceding days were videotaped, as it was a pretty common thing to do during sessions, to quote keep track of progress. But on April 18th, during her final rebirthing session at the basement of Connell Watkins' home, they would unintentionally capture Candace's last moments. In a transcript of the session, therapist Julie Ponder tells Candance to lie down on the navy blue flannel sheet and get into a fetal position. So imagine yourself as a teeny little baby inside your mother's womb, and what it felt like. Warm. It felt tight because her stomach was all around you. Candance is bound in the sheet, the ends twisted above her head and held by Ponder. She is covered by pillows as the 4 adults begin pressing on her. The 4 adults would weigh a combined total of 673 pounds and would continuously put pressure on the 10-year-old Candance Newmaker. What do you think you thought about when you were in there? With Candance responding with, "I thought I was gonna die. If the baby doesn't decide to be born, she will die. When the baby decides to be born, it's a wonderful thing. If you stay in there, you're going to die, and your mommy's going to die." But only after a couple of minutes during the session, Candance would beg for them to stop as she couldn't breathe under the pressure. "Whoever is pushing on my head is not helping. I can't do it. I can't breathe. It's too dark under here. Please quit pushing on my head. I can't do it. Somebody's sitting on top of me. I can't do it. I'm gonna die." With Ponder responding with, "Do you want to be reborn, or do you want to stay in there and die?" With Candance simply replying with, "No, but I'm about to." The session would continue with Watkins and her assistants pretty much repeating the same things, trying to get the response they wanted from Candance, who was clearly struggling, as she would repeatedly ask for oxygen as she couldn't breathe. Eventually, Watkins would reply with, "Just go ahead and die. It's easier. It takes a lot of courage to be born." As this would lead into Candance vomiting on herself, in which the adults in the room did absolutely nothing about, with the continuous pressure and basically having no oxygen for herself. About 40 minutes into the session, Candance would be once asked again if she wanted to be reborn, as she would faintly respond with no, with this ultimately being her last word. Candance would become completely motionless, and after 20 minutes of her last word, they would take the pillows and blankets off Candance, in which they would notice her lips and fingernails being completely blue. Even so, Watkins' first thought when seeing this was, "Oh, there she is, sleeping in her own vomit." Eventually, they realized what actually happened, as they performed CPR and Watkins had called 911. But Candance would be officially declared as dead in the hospital shortly after. Her cause of death would be revealed as suffocation from being tightly wrapped in the flannel sheet with the pressure of the adult's weight. All of the rebirthing sessions would be videotaped by the so-called therapist, which would of course include the last fatal rebirthing session. But the footage has never been released to the public. Copies of the footage have been likely made for legal reasons, as the therapy session would be shown in court. But where the footage is now, if it's ever been destroyed, or who actually owns it is unclear. Connell Watkins and Julie Ponder were accused of child abuse resulting in death, in which the investigations revealed that their so-called rebirthing therapy was dangerous and illegal, with the Candance law, specifically to Colorado, being passed. And in 2001, both were convicted and sentenced to prison. Connell Watkins would receive 16 years, and Julie Ponder would receive 6.
Hold on, brothers. Hold on. Everybody jump, go, go, go. Just keep going if you can. Keep going if you can. Everybody jump down.
The El Reno tornado of May 31st, 2013 remains as one of the most infamous and tragic events in storm chasing history. The town of El Reno sits in the very heart of Tornado Alley. Professionals would gather in the city as it became almost like a magnet for storm chasers during tornado season. Some of the first chasers to respond would be the team of twistex. They were a small but infamous storm chasing group that was active in the late 2000s and early 2010s, in which they would gain popularity for filming and posting extremely close and often life-threatening footage of tornadoes. twistex, who were led by Tim Samaras and his son Paul, along with meteorologist/colleague Carl Jung, as Tim Samaras was considered as one of the most safest and respected tornado researchers in the world. The Discovery Channel hired the team, as they would develop instruments directly in and around tornadoes to measure wind speeds, pressure, and behavior inside the storm, along with data to help meteorologists improve warning systems, giving people more time to take shelter in the future. The atmosphere in El Reno leading up to the storm was pretty uneasy.
Just reiterate what they've been saying, and I've been telling people this all day on my Facebook and Twitter, that you need to be thinking right now just where you will go, what you will do if, heaven forbid, a tornado is aimed at your house.
And at 3:43 p.m., Tim Samaras would tweet, "Storms now initiating south of Watauga along Triple Point. Dangerous day ahead for OK. Stay weather savvy." And around 6:03 p.m., the tornado would touch down southwest of El Reno, as the twistex team had been in the area hours prior, waiting for it. The twistex team would attempt to deploy probes on the southern edge of the El Reno tornado, and at around 6:29 p.m., the tornado, which keep in mind, was already at a record-breaking width of 2.6 miles wide, would suddenly change speeds of 20 miles per hour to over 50 in less than a minute, as it would suddenly shift in the team's direction, making any sort of escape plan practically impossible. A sub-vortex within the El Reno tornado would come in to connect with the team's car. The vehicle in which the three were in would be picked up by the wind currents and thrown hundreds of yards, and according to reports, the car was torn apart during the violent motion, with all three men in the vehicle dying instantly from blunt force trauma, which was caused by the vehicle being rolled, lifted, and destroyed by debris. Their mangled vehicle was found later in the field, with Tim's lifeless body discovered still in the car, while Paul and Carl were ejected out of the vehicle, with their bodies being found later on. There was a total of 8 direct fatalities from the tornado, which would include the 3 members of twistex: Tim Samaras, Paul Samaras, and Carl Jung. The searchers would find multiple of their belongings, which were scattered in a nearby creek, which would include a camera that was used by Carl Jung to record the event. The twistex team's whole mission was to record and document every single tornado they possibly could, both with scientific instruments and cameras. According to the Lost Media Wiki, Gabe Garfield, a friend of the storm chasers, was one of few to view the camera's footage. Gabe has provided a description of the video. In the footage, Carl can be heard nodding, "There's no rain around here," as the camera shows the air around them grow eerily calm. Tim comments, "I think we're in a bad spot." The video ends here, though Tim was hurt soon after repeatedly shouting, "We're going to die," through the radio, with also footage of another storm chaser who survived the tornado catching the twistex team. Both parties, including Gabe, have stated that they will not be releasing any footage out of respect for their families, as the footage will capture their last moments.